Hello, I'm Antoine Belaieff. I'm lead North America at FAIRTIQ, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming TJ Ross for this interview. TJ is newly retired as ED of Pace Bus in the Chicago area, a position that he occupied for 10 years. And prior to that, he spent over 20 years at Phoenix Transit, where he rose through the ranks to the top job. This means that TJ has been thinking about fares and fare collection strategies since before most FAIRTIQ employees were even born. So we were curious. So today we're sitting down with TJ to get his views on fares, fare collection, where the world is going, asking to look into his crystal ball for us. So starting with your career, what would you say was the highlight of your career when it comes to fares and fare collection? And if you were to write a book, what would it say?
Well, I sincerely doubt that I would write a book, but it really did start out with when I first started at Phoenix Transit in the 70s. We transitioned from the what was known as just a drop box, a standard mechanical fare box, to one of the first electronic registering fare box systems in the U.S. And that was a unique opportunity to implement that. It resulted in the ability to collect dollar bills without having them all crunched up and stuffed into a fare box. It allowed us to change fares fairly easily. And surprisingly, it increased our revenue because people were paying the correct fare and the operators were assisted on counting fares. But that took several years to implement, and it had a lot of problems to start with. It wasn't easy. That's where it started. And then as the smart card phenomenon started, the fare boxes that we had bought were basically obsolete, and the manufacturer couldn't upgrade them to accept smart cards or any other kind of striped card. So we decided to do it ourselves, which we were told you can't do that. With the help of some very clever engineer that was available in Phoenix, we added card readers, striped card readers, to the fare boxes, and that resulted in us ability to do a couple of things. One, we accepted credit cards. No one accepted credit cards at that time, and this is in the early 90s. And we also ended up with a post-pay card that we distributed to employers, and they would give to their employees. Their employees would use the buses, and at the end of the month, we sent a bill to the employers, and the employers paid us for all the rides on the buses. That was a good experience, and we were also able to collect a lot of data that way. So that I think kind of does the Phoenix Transit. Moving on, in 1998, so a little over 20 years ago, I started as the executive director at Pace Bus, and they too had a common electronic fare system, and it was common with CTA. And the system was old at that time. It also needed upgrading. However, CTA took a little different direction. They decided that they wanted to view fare collection as a service, and wanted to switch to a contactless card. And we made that transition with CTA, which allowed us to eliminate paper transfers, allowed us to do a lot better job of transferring between the two systems. And surprisingly enough, it created some real trust between CTA and Pace on how we shared revenue, because we could document who was using whose system, where they got on, where they, you couldn't tell where they got off, but you could tell where the transfers were made, and it made it easy for the customer. So from a farebox viewpoint, those are really the highlights. Going from a mechanical farebox to one that was user-friendly and provide a lot of good data for planning services.
Great. So I'll come back to fare collection technologies later. I'm really interested in what's going on right now with the future of work, and especially the reliance that transit agencies have on passes. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you think will happen to monthly passes. So agencies rely on the reliable cash flow that it provides. Some users like the certainty that it provides as well, but increasingly, especially white-collar workers who have an option to work from home, are asking for more flexible options. So what do you think? Can you describe what you think will happen? What the dynamic is in this area?
I think you're absolutely right. The nature of the work trip has changed. It's become more of a random event. You don't necessarily know what days of the week you're going to work, and in many cases you aren't sure where you're going to go to work. So your work trip becomes a little more random. That coupled with the idea that you might not be going to work 5 days a week,
right,
2 days or 3 days, has resulted in, from what I'm hearing from the people I talk to, monthly pass sales just don't exist. It's not a product that people are able to sell. So that being the case, what about 7-day passes or 5-day passes? Those don't seem to be very popular. I think most people are moving to a single payment and dealing with public transit on a trip-by-trip basis rather than anticipating that they're going to buy something ahead of time and not use it. The reality was the monthly pass, on average, was a convenience pass. People didn't use it to its full economic potential. The average fare on a monthly pass in many places was higher than the normal boarding pass because people didn't use it that often. It just was a convenience. So the prepaid monthly pass, I just don't see an immediate future for that. Maybe later on, but not now.
So are you saying that agencies were banking on the fact that some people are not great at math, or are great at math, but are just really used to allocating a certain budget at the beginning of the month? And so now that people do their math and feel that maybe it's not worth it if they don't go to the office every day, what do you think is going to replace it? And what would you tell an agency that's contemplating, the future of that secure source of revenue? What kind of avenues would you explore if you were them?
Well, my direction to them would be that they need to think about their fare policy in a different way. They need to think about it in terms of I would say, post-pay, that more of their services are employer-based or services-based. Being able to get your transit fare through your employer, being able to get your transit fare, say, through your school, being able to get it through perhaps a social service agency or medical center that you frequent. Those are all distinct possibilities, and it becomes just one of the many benefits that you have, whether you're employed or going to school. That I think you have to look at. And I think transit systems have to find a way to be the broker for all the different kinds of services that are becoming available, whether they're electric scooters or Uber or taxi cabs. Even the possibility of, as I understand they're doing this in Holland, they're reimbursing people who ride their bicycles to work, and finding a way to do that. So it gives the transit system far more flexibility on the provision of public transit services through a number of different modes. I think they have to find a way to do that.
So, we see a lot of interest in capping, and we see great take up of these products in North America. So so we'll see what agencies decide to do, and also how they decide to fall back on their feet and stay attuned to their customers' needs. I wanted your opinion on another trend which we observe in Europe, which is distance-based fares. So in North America, you see that most frequently with commuter rail, where the further you travel, the more you pay. Some agencies in Europe are starting to look at it even at a local level. Obviously, in Asia and Australia, it's quite common. What do you say to that? There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of misunderstanding and concerns. But what's your view on distance-based fares?
I look at a distance-based fare as an opportunity to capture additional pieces of the urban travel market. Right now, if you're only going 4 or 5 blocks, you have to pay full fare as though you were going 4 or 5 miles. And what we know in public transit is that the fixed fare has always been a problem from an equity standpoint. It is well documented. The studies that were done on it were done in the 1980s and 1990s. This isn't anything new to us. We know that short trips are far more expensive per passenger mile than the longer trips, and we need to find a way to attract people to make shorter trips on public transit. Now, then the other end of that is that some people are making very long trips on public transit, and they're taking advantage of fixed fares to make those trips. I would see that in the Chicago region, where people would make a decision to use PACE and CTA for a very long trip because it was a fixed fare. When the alternative they had would be to use Metra, the commuter rail, which had a distance-based or a zone-based fare, essentially, and they wanted to avoid that higher cost. So they would spend the time on PACE and CTA rather than ride Metra. It resulted in some duplication of services, and I think that we're kind of at the point now we really can't do that. We need to bring ourselves back to allowing a distance-based fare that has use on all the public transit services, and the second part to it is all of the micro mobility services, all of the transit network companies, all the taxi cabs, they all are on a distance-based fare. And we need to find a way to integrate our services with theirs. And the distance-based fare is fundamental to doing that.
Right, but in many urban centers, we've all heard the term "drive till you qualify," or for a lot of people who are not even thinking about qualifying for a mortgage. There's spatial mismatch where people cannot afford to live where they work. So what would you say to an agency that might be interested in distance-based fares, but they have a large constituency who unfortunately has to travel over long distances and may not be able to afford higher fares?
I think that's a fair policy. That's a fair policy decision, and that it's very. There are systems that have identified costs associated with housing, costs associated with transportation, and accessibility to employment, and that it'd be possible to establish a kind of a geofence, if you want to call it, around certain areas, and say that if you're coming from this area to another area, and it might be a long commute, that the fares are X. The other way you could handle it is like through employers, and employers could make the decision that they're going to subsidize parts of the fare in order to attract people to their employment centers, and realizing that it takes a long time to get there. Examples I can think of are that all of the warehousing functions that are occurring now on the fringe of urban areas. That's a long commute for people that take those jobs, and that the ability to focus on those fares and provide those kinds of services at a cost that the employer and the employee can afford, that's important. And a distance-based fare helps you do that. You can adjust things.
Right.
You end up with a lot of flexibility that you don't have right now.
So they can be capped as well at on a daily or weekly basis, and so what you may end up with perhaps is a lower fare for very short trips, but not necessarily a longer fare for longer trips. So there's a lot of opportunities, right?
I think I've even toyed with the idea, as radical as it sounds, of these long trips to get jobs from areas that you can afford to live in. It might be a good idea to subsidize those trips pretty heavily. There's been a fair amount of talk about zero fares, no fare, and I would say that you might even look at employers being willing to pay people to commute to their work sites. That certainly has some real value in dealing with some of the equity issues that exist in our urban areas.
So I can't let that go. You mentioned the free fare movement. I was listening to a podcast from Switzerland the other day that said that about 40 U.S. cities don't charge fares. A number of cities suspended fare collection for maybe not policy reasons during COVID, but sometimes because it was a way to minimize contacts or avoid boarding through the front door. And now there's a number of referenda in Switzerland around free fares. So what do you think about that? It sounds really attractive. You want to get people on transit. Fare collection is expensive. Fares don't always contribute a large proportion of costs anyway. Let's just make it free. What do you think?
I've had experience with free fares, and there's some interesting results. There is a free fare system in the Chicago region that exists for people for low income, very low income elderly, I believe, and then also low income people who have disabilities. And that system is an interesting one because it's free fare on the commuter rail, CTA, and PACE. And that allows people to make free transfers between all three systems. And they use it very differently. The anecdotal information that I would get from people who had those cards was that, oh yeah, I would take Metra here, and then I'd switch over and take CTA there, and then I'd switch over and take PACE here. And they could use the system the way no one else could use it. So there are some positive sides to it. I think the negative side to it is operational. It's very expensive to put on peak hour service, and when you have people, when you have free fares during the peak hours, I think that it can create more problems than it solves. I think it can slow down the whole system for everybody if you get incredible crush loads that you can't handle. So that would be my primary problem. Plus, operators sometimes have people that don't have housing that spend a lot of time on the buses if they can ride free, and that can be a problem. But they aren't things that can be solved. I'm not a big free fare advocate. I think that it may be one tool we can use, but I think it's just too much for just say, oh, we're going to have free fares.
Definitely something to follow and see where it lands, and probably very different in various areas and what their needs are. So I want to go back to what you said early, that your new fare collection system in Phoenix generated more revenue. And often we see a bit of a dichotomy or a silo between the people who do fare policy and then the people who do fare collection. Can you talk about the benefit of looking at it together and leveraging fare collection technology, advanced technologies to enable creativity in fare policy and enabling new products, and then of course generate new ridership and revenue?
Yeah, let me start out with giving an example. And this comes from the Chicago area. We had a bus service that ran along the Stevenson corridor, which is from the southwest part of the region. And we ran downtown, an express bus service. We didn't carry hardly anybody on it. Once we were able to get a bus on shoulder project and to beat traffic from the travel time, that system just went overloaded overnight. So when we were able to get our travel times down, we were able to get passengers. It was a market we didn't know existed, but we now we had a very good experience with that. The interesting thing about distance-based fares is that you will have the data about where people are boarding the bus, and conceivably you could also have it where you could get some feeling for where their home was and area and where they were going to work exactly, and start seeing the characteristics of a successful market. That allows you then to understand what makes a successful bus service, what travel times people are willing to do, what fares they're willing to pay, and then you can go out and basically look at your demographics and look at the travel markets that exist now and see if you can find more like that to put service in. So I think it helps you with that. The other thing, that if you can have a distance-based fare and use it for the CNTs, the Connected Network Transportation Companies, and I always say that wrong. I think it's Transportation Network. It's Transportation Network Companies. Anyway, and you subsidize those trips, and you get the data, because right now when you subsidize those kinds of trips as a transit system, it's hard to get the data out of the private companies. But if you have an overlay system, you can get the data. Then you can start seeing where the markets are. Where do we have potential? Where are people coming from and going to? And do we have enough density of trips so that we can put in new service in that area? So you can do a better job of designing service. And I see that as one of the fundamental things, is having more data for designing successful service and not just putting a bus on a street. You can design the service to match what you see as the markets now.
Great. So the key message to decision makers is think about where your data is going to come from. Make sure that your fare collection system can support innovation like fare by distance or replacements for passes. In closing, what other messages would you have to a transit leader who's considering what to do with their fare policy and what to do with fare collection? What do you think are key things to look at?
I think they have to move towards being the region's broker for transportation, which means they have to have a way for everybody to pay for transportation, which includes all the non-public transit type services. All those other services are using distance-based fares. Transit has to get some experience with distance-based fares. I'm not saying they got to go out and implement it for the whole system right away tomorrow and force everybody into a distance-based fare system. But I think they have to go out and give it a try. Take a look at what insurance companies are doing with the way they charge for insurance. They're establishing distance-based insurance rates. They're establishing rates based on when people use their cars and how they use them. They're even monitoring how they drive them and deciding how much we're going to charge you based on how fast you drive your car.
Right.
Not everybody buys that kind of insurance, but insurance companies are learning from that. Transit needs to learn from the use of distance-based fares, how people use their systems, get a good feel for what the potential is. And my suggestion is they got to try it. They got to try something different. And I think it's time to do that. Get some data, figure out, does this work for us, and what percentage of our customers would really benefit from it, and also what markets could we use it in that we currently can't even begin to penetrate now.
So you talked about postpaid earlier. What do you see the advantages of postpaid versus prepaid? So in most cases, a customer gets an account and loads their account, $20, $30, and then selects a product like a ticket or a pass off of that account. So postpaid kind of changes that. What do you see the benefits there?
I think that's another one where it brings us into the common retail market, or the common market for services and goods. You pay for your utilities based on what you use, how much electricity you use. You pay for heating based on how much natural gas or oil you use. You pay for your cell phone based on the number of minutes. Now they do have packages where they say it's capped at this much, but if you can, of course, pay on a per minute basis. It's an option that's available for all these other services, but it's not available for transit. Transit wants you to prepay. Transit wants you to know how much you're going to use the system. Transit demands you don't pay a fixed rate for gasoline for your car every year. You pay for it as you use it, and you pay for it before you use it, but it's a stored service. You can make some judgment about how much you're paying, and you're not guessing. Right now, transit on prepaying, you've got to guess how much you're going to use that system in order to get the best value out of it. That's one thing. The other is, I really do believe it needs to be more employer-based, which employers are not going to subsidize a flat rate for transportation. They want to subsidize something that is based on how much you use, and that's just pure and simple. They want to see that. They want to see the benefits of providing that service and who's getting those benefits.
Fantastic. So data rich, flexible, innovative, and future oriented. So we hope that that the industry will go in that direction.
Right.
So TJ, I want to really thank you today for all your wisdom, sharing your wisdom from many years in the industry, and we look forward to reconnecting. Thank you so much, TJ.
You're welcome.